Welcome back, family, to the Storm Tracker podcast. I'm Marcus Benjamin, representing for CanesCounty.com, part of the Rivals.com network. And make sure you subscribe to this podcast on all platforms. Also, subscribe to this YouTube channel live from Canes County. Today, I have joining me Sam Spiegelman, national recruiting analyst from Rivals.com. He's new to the family, or kind of returning to the family, you could say. He covers the Southeast for Rivals. Kind enough to join me today to talk a little Miami recruiting. Thanks for joining me today, Sam.
What's going on, Marcus? Thanks for having me today.
Nothing much, man. Nothing but recruiting is going on with official visits happening last weekend and official visits coming up this weekend and a couple of weekends afterwards. So great things or great news coming out of Coral Gables, or positive news, I should say, with a lot of big name recruits visiting, including the likes of Zion Grady and Andrew Purcell and others. But what people want to know is just, what did Miami do during this weekend, and how did they do? Is basically the question. And you had a chance to talk to a couple of guys and kind of get their feedback on their visit to Coral Gables. How do you think Miami did after the first official visit weekend?
Yeah, I think all your subscribers at home are probably saying this weekend was awful because it wasn't full of commitments and a ton of breaking news on Sunday and Monday. But the way that Miami is recruiting right now, they had a fantastic first weekend. They had a lot of their top blue chip guys on campus. Kind of kicked it off with a really strong start. When it's the only time I've ever seen kids really commit after the first weekend of official visits was last year when that big Clemson spree kind of happened. Most kids want to, go from visit to visit to visit, make 3 or 4 visits and make up their mind. And I think with a lot of the cases of the Miami visitors, I think Miami put their best foot forward and took a big leap forward with a lot of their top guys. You mentioned some of the guys that were on campus: Andrew Purcell, Zion Grady, Byron Lewis, Eric Winters. That's just the first weekend. They have obviously a full month ahead. Even though it was kind of without the booms, without the big commitments, I think that Miami is positioning themselves. They only have 6 commitments so far, and I think by the end of the summer, that number is going to be in the double digits. And I think we're going to look back at this weekend and maybe a few others as some of those turning points in a lot of these big recruitments in the direction of the Hurricanes.
Absolutely great news for Hurricanes fans to hear there. The highest rated recruit was Zion Grady, absolute stud defensive end out of Alabama. It was kind of an enterprise, a Starship Enterprise, a weekend with 3 enterprise guys visiting with Purcell, and Grady and Winters, all outstanding talents. Love Eric Winters as well. So I'll ask your opinion on all 3 enterprise guys and just your perception of them as players, and then just Miami's chances to land the trio of enterprise players.
I love that, the Starship Enterprise, and they're 3 deep, and they're 3 guys that school, some of the top programs around the country all covet right now. And I think that if not all, most of them will be committed by the end of the summer. So it's becoming crunch time. Let's start right at the top with Zion Grady. I think he's one of the best edge rushers in the entire country, and I think he kind of proved that as a junior. Really excited to see what he does as a senior this year. But he's long, he's strong, he's got speed, he's got power, he's got length. And I think he just kind of has my favorite thing about edge rushers. They kind of have that mentality, and I think Zion has that to kind of wreak havoc. And I think he's only getting better and better, and we've seen that from year to year on tape. Listen, we know he's one-time Alabama commit. He reopened things earlier this spring. One of those players I think Miami made a real big leap with is Zion Grady. He's already been to Coral Gables a few times, but I think the time spent around Jason Taylor and Mario Cristobal, seeing the vision, the current Miami defensive line is it. And Zion seeing how he would fit in and kind of get that sense from a Hall of Famer like Jason Taylor. I think that resonates with someone like Zion. From talking to people after the visit, I got the sense that Miami, if not one, is maybe in the top 2. He's got a couple of visits still on deck: Ohio State, Auburn, Tennessee, Florida State. I think I think Miami is in that top 2. We'll see how the rest of June visits go, but big step forward for Miami with one of the best edge rushers in the entire country. Next on that Starship Enterprise, Eric Winters, real physical, safe prize, high school. Eric had a lot of positive things to say about this visit. He kind of said that it set the tone. I don't know whether to fully buy in or not, because he has been leaning in-state toward Auburn for a good chunk of the offseason, but obviously has been reluctant to pull the trigger. We'll see if that Miami visit really gave him some pause on the Auburn momentum. But we're talking about someone who kind of fits that same mold as a Miami safety. We're talking about some of the great safeties that come from Miami, and I'm not comparing him to Ed Reed or anyone. But I am saying a physical, big-bodied safety that's not afraid to come up and play against the run and kind of play hard against big-body pass catchers like tight ends and running backs. And I think more versatile and more gifted in pass coverage than people give them credit for. I think Miami is in this, but I do think they have some work to do. Seems like they did kind of make up some ground this past weekend. And then Andrew Purcell, we talked about his relationship with Chivas Jackson before the official visit. Chivas offered Andrew when he was at Marshall and wasted zero time offering him as soon as he got to Miami. And someone like Andrew Purcell, whose recruitment has kind of come along a little bit later at corner, he's now a 4-star for Rivals. I think that getting that big Miami offer and then getting an official visit like this weekend opened his eyes to Miami a little bit more than we gave him credit for. The past couple of weeks have been really eventful for Purcell. He's picked up Georgia offers. He's picked up Clemson offers. He's going to be in Athens on June 11th, and he's still working on getting the Clemson. He grew up a Clemson fan, and obviously he's from the state of Alabama, so that's one to watch. And he's got OVs set to Kentucky and Tennessee. So it's a busy month for Andrew Purcell. But I think Miami stepped up in a big way, and I think that they've ascended at least another tier to watch. I think that you have to watch Georgia and you have to watch Clemson. I think you can also have to watch Miami and Chivas Jackson and Purcell's recruitment now moving forward.
Yeah, I totally agree with you about Andrew Purcell. I spoke to him right after his visit, and just the feeling that I got from him was that, it was an outstanding visit for him, and that, Miami really kind of bolted up his list just based on the feeling that I got from him and the conversation that I had with him. And I felt the same way about Zion Grady as well. And Miami is done really well when it comes to landing top defensive ends in these past couple of cycles, especially with Jason Taylor at the helm. Who wouldn't want to be coached by a Hall of Famer and live in Miami? It's definitely different from Alabama, Troy, Alabama. So I think they're in a really good spot for that Starship and Enterprise trio. But I also agree with you about Winters as well. I think Winters is the one guy who, if I would probably bet that probably wouldn't land in Miami. Of the three, I would think he is probably the one that probably stays more closer to home. But speaking of closer to home, we had some closer to home type guys officially visit Miami as well, in Ezekiel Marshallin and Byron Lewis. But I wanted to talk to you about Lewis just for a bit. Lewis, top running back in the state of Florida by Rivals.com. Miami has been kind of the unofficial favorite for a while now. But, you got players. I mean, yeah, you got players like Florida State and Wisconsin, surprisingly, in this race here for Byron Lewis. But, after the weekend and just kind of knowing what's ahead for him as far as visits are concerned with those two schools, where do you think Miami kind of stands with Byron Lewis?
Yeah, well, like you said, they've quietly maybe been the leader in the clubhouse for a lot of the offseason. And, the offseason, especially June, is, everyone has a top 10 or a top 5 at different points of the offseason. And that top 5 and top 10 is constantly, it's a fluid situation. And I think a school like Miami has been kind of one of the constants, along with Florida State with Byron Lewis. And that's a school that gives me the most hesitation when I think about his recruitment. Wisconsin, like you said, kind of newish in this recruitment. He's visited a ton of schools this spring. But I think, after this official visit, another really positive visit for Byron Lewis, the first visit to go to the hometown team. That's that's a little bit unprecedented. Usually you sometimes save the hometown visit for last. And obviously he wanted to go get some questions answered, check out some things. And you got to speak to him afterwards, and I'm anxious to hear what you have to say. But it felt like he felt really comfortable in Miami, and I think at this point in his recruitment, with maybe 2 or 3 teams left, and only a few teams really pushing Miami, you have to like where Miami stands at this point in the summer, with only a few more hurdles before Byron is probably going to make his decision.
Yeah, I definitely got the sense that Miami is the leader after speaking to him. He, just said the Hurricanes kind of know where his heart is. When you say something like that, it sounds like, the school is definitely near and dear to him. So watching highlights of him now, explosive back, good balance, can, run over defenders. So he's definitely a coveted guy that Miami wants. And Miami kind of wants to continue the tradition of getting the top back in Broward County. For the past couple of years. They were able to do that. They got Mark Fletcher, him from Ohio State, and then they did that again in the following cycle last year with the Jordan Lyle, the top back, in my opinion, in the entire state of Florida. So if they can continue to do that, they are setting themselves up for the future with Lewis, and then with future backs as well. So I definitely think that Miami is the presumed leader here, and they're just going to be tough to beat just based on the conversation
Yeah,
that I had with them.
Kind of to that point is they've been able to recruit locally, Broward County, as well as Miami is expected to. That has not always been the case over the past 5-10 years. That's so credit Coach Cristobal and his staff. But Miami, if you look at their, they obviously went out in the portal and found their back in Damian Martinez, but the depth behind Damian, they need to supplement that. And if you're able to kind of score home with Byron Lewis, keep a local guy home from a program like American Heritage, and you look at some of the skill sets, and you were talking about him. He's a tackle breaker. He's got speed to break to the outside. He's hard to bring down. That physicality, the combination of speed and physicality, rather, not to mention size and toughness, and coming from a winning program like Heritage, I think that fits all the bill of what Coach Cristobal is looking for in his backs. I got to watch Damian Martinez quite a bit in high school. You see a lot of those common traits in Byron Lewis, who probably has a little bit more speed, and get Miami fans a little bit more excited about that backfield coming up in the next couple of years potentially.
Once again, Sam Spiegelman joining me from Rivals.com, talking a little Miami recruiting. Sam, another big weekend coming up here. Miami's got a ton of top guys going to visit Coral Gables again. Maybe we see some commits after this upcoming weekend. You never know. Someone could probably be, just really inspired by the official visit and the boat rides and, just make their pledge to the Hurricanes. But based on what you've seen as far as the list of players that are visiting Miami this weekend, just who do you think is the most critical prospect for Miami to kind of make some headway with?
I'm glad you asked who I thought was the most critical, because for a second I thought you might ask who might be on commitment watch, and I was definitely going to get myself in trouble with my answers because I don't think they're on commitment watch. But I do think that the next 2 visitors are astronomical, especially, I mean, not to take away from the wealth of talent that was on campus last weekend, but a couple of 5 stars or really close to 5 stars coming to campus this weekend. One of them is from the state of Florida, and Dallas Wilson. Of course, he's been committed to Oregon for a year plus, but he's one of the best pass catchers in the country. He's coming back on campus, and I think that his commitment to Oregon is more open than people realize. Miami has recruited Tampa pretty well under Coach Cristobal. They've really recruited the entire state of Florida very well under Cristobal. So I think getting Dallas Wilson on campus during this June, like I said, not only do I think that his commitment to Oregon is somewhat open, I think that if he does to make a decision, it's not going to be something that is premeditated. It's going to likely be a spur of the moment, and an official visit to Miami could certainly be the catalyst there. But the biggest visitor, Marcus, no question, 5-star defensive tackle Elijah Griffin. I was just serving up
Yeah.
a small little appetizer before I got up to that. No one knows anything about Elijah Griffin. He keeps everything so close to the vest. All we know is that the huge 5-star defensive tackle from Savannah, Georgia. He's been to Georgia the most of any other school. That's without question. But he continues to make visits to schools like Miami, like Oregon, like South Carolina. And the fact that he's making these official visits, I think it's something to watch. Obviously, we talked about Zion Grady and the way that Jason Taylor and Mario Cristobal have recruited defensive linemen so well since they've arrived in Coral Gables. Well, someone like Elijah Griffin is going to be right at the top of Mario Cristobal's priority list. So you talk about boat rides. They might have to bring out the yacht. They might have to bring out whatever, sea excursion for Elijah Griffin, because they're going to try to show him why Miami is the fit. Even though I think Georgia is going to be hard to beat in this one, with someone who we don't know too much about, I think that leaves some spontaneity in his recruitment. In a school like Miami, they can press the right buttons. They have the right coaching staff with the right experience. And I think that they can show him and his family a good time. And I think the latter will be the big part here. We know that his family is from Georgia and has been to Athens quite a few times. We're expecting his family to be with him in Miami this weekend. And that'll probably be the most important people in his camp to sway if Miami and Mario Cristobal are going to make a run at Elijah Griffin. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think Miami needs to, bring out the biggest yacht that they can find, or maybe put them on a speedboat or something, because Elijah Griffin is an absolute monster. The 5-star that will be visiting Miami, so I think Miami's in a decent spot here. I mean, I did speak to him the last time he was in Coral Gables on campus. His face glowed a little bit every time I kind of asked about Miami. So Miami, I think, did very well on that visit. So I think if they make another big stride here this weekend, I think they're going to be right there in the race. And once Miami's in the race with one of these guys, there's a chance. I think many people were probably surprised about Justin Scott last year, and Miami was just kind of like in the race. I think it's a very similar recruitment that you see here with Elijah Griffin. So I think Miami definitely has a chance to really impress the 5-star defensive lineman this weekend. And my guess is that they will, and stay in a good spot for him. Dallas Wilson, yeah, I think that's a player that Miami, from what I hear, he's at the top of the list. He's right there at the top of the board with, a couple of other receivers. Outstanding player. He grew up watching Oregon, so I think that's why he kind of, committed to the Ducks early on here. But Miami's definitely has a chance here. I think Miami's going to do whatever they can to try to land him or flip him from the Ducks. So we'll see what kind of happens here. But a lot of other great names on this list here. You got Josh Moore, very interesting talent down here in South Florida. I think he's somewhat underrated. Big body, huge catch radius, really athletic. I think Miami's in a really good place for Josh Moore. But the other player that I kind of wanted to talk about was Cortez Smith. I know you're familiar with the Georgia territory here. He's one of the players that I think Miami fans should get really excited for in case he does commit to the Hurricanes. He's visiting this weekend. I spoke to him twice already this year while he was on campus. So it's his third time visiting Miami in the calendar year. What are your thoughts on him and Miami's chances to land that stud of O lineman?
Yeah, I actually just caught up with Cortez after his South Carolina official visit last weekend, and he told me that the South Carolina visit kind of set the bar. So, he's got obviously Miami this weekend. I believe he's going to Georgia and Georgia Tech before the end of the month. I could have one of those visits confused. Don't get me wrong. My head is swirling at this point in the calendar, but I take two takeaways from my conversation with Cortez. One, South Carolina set the bar, so maybe he's a little bit more impressionable after each visit, which opens the door for one good visit, could certainly sway things one way or the other. And I know that he is going to make a decision at the end of these visits. So, whether it's South Carolina maybe in the driver's seat, or if this Miami visit launches him, or if, maybe you see how the last visit goes to Georgia and take it from there. I think that I think he's personally set the July commitment date in order to avoid those, flash in the pan moments where maybe he feels like committing. I think he's going to try to soak up all of these visits first before, pushing forward. But, I don't know if he's a lock to necessarily stay home like some kids in Georgia.
Right.
Like you said, he's been to Miami a few times. He's been to South Carolina a few times. I'm sure that Georgia is going to try to sell him on their rich history up front and obviously playing for a title contending program. But like you said, once Miami is in the race, I chalk that up to anything. Miami is not currently very deep at offensive line for this year. So I think this will largely fall on what Coach Mirabal and Coach Cristobal view of Cortez Smith as from a talent evaluation standpoint, whether he's at the top of the board and they're going to push all in to try to get him as soon as possible. I think that they have a fighting shot going into July.
Yeah, absolutely. Very interesting to see what happens with Smith. He's a player that I'm pretty high on. One other player I'll ask about this upcoming weekend is Jaden Perlot. Kind of an interesting, player to be visiting South Florida, committed to Georgia, highly rated player. Just kind of want to know your thoughts on him and just kind of where you see his recruitment playing out and Miami's place in it.
Yeah, this has been a very interesting recruitment to monitor for, I would say, the past half year, maybe even a little bit longer. Like I said, time is just a word in my mind. So my perception of it is sometimes a little bit off. But obviously, he's been committed in state to Georgia for several months. Last season during his junior season at Buford, there was a lot of buzz about Florida State making a run at Perlot. Then last weekend, he made his official visit to Alabama. And then, of course, this weekend, like you said, he'll be in Coral Gables. It seems like Jaden is doing his due process and making sure that he gets all of his visits done and feels good about his decision. Or if he elects to flip, he has all that information at hand. To me, this is someone who maybe committed to Georgia early, but the in-state school has kind of shored things up on the back end. He's been in Athens kind of in and out after all these visits elsewhere. So I think, as an underclassman, it's easy to kind of fall in love and enjoy these visits and maybe be a little impressionable, like we were saying. Visiting Alabama, visiting Miami, I think it'll definitely get him thinking. But the way that Georgia has recruited him and kind of squashed a lot of the drama every time it kind of pops up, I feel good about him ultimately sticking with Georgia as long as Georgia continues to recruit him as hard as they have.
Yeah, it'd be a surprise if Miami could flip Perlot, but stranger things have happened, and I've learned to never doubt Mario Cristobal and his staff when they are high on a particular player, and they are pretty high on Perlot from what I hear. So before I let you go, Sam, people kind of want to know overall the big picture, right? Big picture as to, where this class will eventually place as far as rankings are concerned. The year before, they had the 8th ranked class. Last year, the 5th ranked class, according to Rivals.com. With the way things, I know it's early, man, and it's kind of early to tell, especially kind of in the midst of June official visits. I think this probably will be a better question July 1st or when we're at the 5-star event in Jacksonville. But where do you think this class kind of ends up as far as rankings concerned?
Yeah, well, we were joking a little bit off air before we got going that this is the worst question to ask me because I have no sense of the future and I'm terrible at math. So I can't even try to calculate it to make myself look smart. But I have a little bit of recruiting background I'll try to lean on here. So like we talked about at the top of the show, it's Miami's class inside the top 40 with just 6 commitments. And that's a number that I think you and I both think will maybe double up by this time next month, which is only to credit what a big official visit month of June will do to a recruiting class. But in looking at those numbers, Marcus, there's only 5 teams in the country with a higher average star ranking than Miami right now, which is pretty telling about Miami's evals. And like we also talked about, they're in a great spot with a lot of these 4-star and 5-star kids that are still on the board, either uncommitted or still very much in Miami's plans, to name a few. Andrew Purcell, Zion Grady, Floyd Bucard, Eric Winters, DJ Pickett, Chris Ewald, Cortez Mills, Bryce Fitzgerald, Byron Lewis, so on and so forth. Those are all guys that I have Miami, if not as a leader, in that lead group at this point in the spring, this point in the summer. See what I'm saying about time?
Right.
With that being said, as the class starts to assemble, they're in a great spot. I think I always say this: recruiting rankings, where you finish 5th or 15th, it's all subjective because coaches view these players differently than fans or subscribers or myself or yourself. So it's all subjective. But if you got a lot of those names in your class, those 4- and 5-star guys that we know are at the top of their board, I think that this class will naturally be ranked, probably within the top 10, if not better. The big question is which one of these 4-star safeties, which one of these 4 or 5-star offensive and defensive linemen end up in the class. We know that they have the quarterback, but with it beyond that, a lot of the big names are still out there. So I think if we were to fast forward a month and see this with 10 or 11 commitments, and that star ranking average is still where it's at, and I expect it to be, I think we might see one of the better recruiting classes from Coach Cristobal, but it's a big month of June before we start really getting a little bit closer. But all the little tidbits and signs are all pretty encouraging so far for Miami.
Great stuff from you. Sam Spiegelman, once again from Rivals.com, kind enough to join me on this lovely Tuesday ahead of Miami's second official weekend. Where can they find more information about you, Sam, and just a little bit of background? And obviously you're new, kind of back for the first time, as I like to say, to Rivals. So just a little bit about you, what you cover, and what we can see from you in the future.
Yeah. I implore everyone to obviously go on to Rivals.com. Our national staff is working their butts off, especially this time of the year. It's big for evaluations. It's official visit season, which is new for me to say, but really I view June as camp season. June is camp season and major events for this 2025 cycle, and also big official visit season. So we're trying to cover all that and then some at Rivals.com. You can give me a follow on Twitter at Sam Spiegs, SamSpiegs. I am on Instagram at Sam Spiegelman _. Hopefully we'll have some more Miami scoop on there for you. We'll have you covering OT7 this weekend. I'm happy to be back with the Rivals Network, working with great people like yourself, Marcus. I think there's a lot of great talent at this network, and I'm just excited to be working and doing my thing here and around great people.
Absolutely. Appreciate having you. 100%. That's going to wrap it up for the Storm Tracker podcast. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast on all platforms. Also subscribe to this YouTube channel live from Canes County. And most importantly, subscribe to the website, canescounty.com for free. Use the promo code Miami30. Until the next episode.